No matter what the speed limits are in this province, drivers, it seems, are intent on breaking them. We've seen some extreme examples of that this week. But some say, hey, maybe the problem isn't with the speeders. Maybe it's with the speed limits. Interesting. Ian Tootill heads up a driver's advocacy group called SENSEBC, and he joins us on the phone this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, David.
Do you think speed limits are too low in Canada?
Yes, I believe they are. The speed limit should be set with the idea that the reasonable, safe majority voluntarily comply with them. And we, as you mentioned, doesn't seem to matter what the speed limits are in Canada. People seem to disobey them. But the reality is that they don't disobey speed limits when they're set properly in the first place. And there is methodology to set speed limits, and it's not utilized here.
You use your phrase, the reasonable, safe majority. Who are those people?
Well, 70% non-compliance on many highways in British Columbia, and those people seem to be driving perfectly safely.
Speed limits are lower in BC than they are in Alberta.
Well, we have some highways in BC that are posted at 110.
You seem to have a lot more at 90 than we have here.
Yeah.
Where would you like to see the speed limit?
Well, I've stuck to this mantra for years, and that's that I'm not a traffic engineer. I'm not qualified to determine the speed limit, but there is a methodology to properly determine it. It's called the 85th percentile. And that is the idea that you measure the speed that traffic travels unencumbered or unthreatened by law enforcement over a period of time, over a period of months. And you choose the upper end of the bell curve so that you get the maximum compliance to it. So there is a point where, while you're correct that people tend to disobey speed limits, they'll disobey them to a certain point. They won't disobey them if they're set properly.
Are you arguing that higher speed limits would make for safer roads?
Well, the whole focus in Canada seems to be on absolute speed, where really what causes a crash is a sudden stop or speed variance. So if you reduce variance, the difference in travel speed between vehicles, yes, you do tend to get more safety. So if people naturally want to travel, let's say a highway is posted at 90 and everybody wants to travel at 120, you'd probably be better off setting the speed limit at 120.
So you just believe that if everybody was going 120, it would be safer?
Well, I don't believe it. I can prove it.
How? Tell me that.
Well, if you just Google 85th percentile, I mean, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, which is the worldwide body of engineers that recommend a speed-setting methodology, recommend the 85th percentile. And in British Columbia, we pressured the government in 2002 to do a speed limit review, an independent speed limit review. And they came back suggesting in the preamble, in the summary at the front, exactly what I've just told you about the methodology and how it should be used. But, few officials have the guts to go out and do this kind of stuff because they're afraid that they're going to come out appearing, not on the side of safety. I mean, it's easy to start clobbering people with impoundments and, tougher speeding laws. And I understand Alberta's considering copycat legislation to BC. That's why you've been hearing about all these high-profile, speeding incidents over the last couple of weeks. I mean, there's probably no more than there ever has been, but now they're talking about it because they want people to be ready for the legislation.
I think you're the first guest I've heard say, prove it by Googling it, but I appreciate the points you're making. Look, you say we have low fatality rates, and I'm going to take that at face value. But isn't it worth slowing down if you can save even one life? Does that make sense?
Sorry, did you say that I said that we have low fatality rates? I didn't say that. Actually, we have some of the poorer fatality rates in the OECD countries. We have some of the lower speed limits and lower travel speeds and some of the worst fatality rates.
I must have misunderstood you. So you're saying we already have high fatality rates in Canada?
We don't have relatively high by world standards, but we have high in terms of comparison to the OECD countries. So if you take the 10 OECD that the Transport Canada compares, we rank in the bottom of those 10. And actually, the countries with the better fatality rates are actually the countries with the higher speed limits and higher travel speeds.
So your argument is driving faster will save lives?
No, I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing that if we set limits properly and we reduce speed variance and reduce the barriers to driving at consistent speeds, you should theoretically see fatality rates drop and crashes drop. So to address the statement that you just made, that which is a common utterance from the people promoting this kind of stuff, that if just one life is saved, it must be worth it. We're dealing with inertia here on the roads, and we've accepted a certain amount of risk to get from A to B. And
so I didn't follow that. We're dealing with inertia on the roads. What are you saying? What do you mean?
Right. What I'm saying is that we're dealing with motion here, and we're dealing with inertia. People are moving from A to B. There's speed involved, yes, and there's a possibility of interactions between cars and stationary objects. We are always going to have injuries and fatalities. In British Columbia, we have a government and we have a superintendent of motor vehicles whose stated objective right on the website is 0 fatalities on our roads. I'm going to say right here and now that is impossible, absolutely impossible. And if we have people that have that objective, as their goal, it's no wonder that they do some very unreasonable things. And
what should their goal be? Is there an acceptable number?
Well, I don't know, but it's not 0, because I can tell you that there are accidents and there are crashes. Crashes are preventable and accidents are not. And I'll give you, we don't have time to go into this, but let's say you're driving along and an asteroid falls out of nowhere and crushes your car. That's an accident. It can't be prevented. It's just an act of God, and it's one of those things that happen when you happen to be there at that time.
But that seems a little more random than driving fast on a highway, doesn't it?
It does, but there are random events when you're driving on a highway. There are animals that run out in front of vehicles, and that's why near Alberta there are speed limits of 90 because you're near national parks. So, we have a freeway that was built in BC back in the 80s called the Coquihalla. And that's a very long, expensive stretch of roadway that has all the barriers to crashes or accidents removed, or most of them removed. You don't have on-ramps. You have a divided, 4-lane highway. You have rumble strips on the side of the road. You have very long sight lines, so there's lots of room for braking. And you don't have merge lanes so that you don't have many interactions with other vehicles. That's what you call a freeway. That's what they posted at 110. And people are driving it between 120 and 140 on that road. So, one could argue that if you've posted at 110 and you're going to go out and clobber people if they don't do 110, but everybody wants to travel at 120 or 140, you're actually creating the possibility of variance in interactions, which can be dangerous. So that's
Mr. Tootill,
the argument.
Thank you very much for joining us for the arguments today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, David.
That's Ian Tootill. He heads up the group SENSEBC. It's a driver's advocacy group and is lobbying for higher speed limits.